coming into this part of the business is fleets will ask me, well, what is your rate? And as we heard today, there's a lot of confusion over what is a rate, and these guys have done a good job of explaining rates. We've taken a little bit of a different approach for most of our fleets, where we have what's called a cost plus. And so instead of creating a single 5% charge or something like that, we pass through exactly all the charges that are assessed by all those people on the list, and then add a fee for us so that you know what our fee is, because we won't necessarily play a game in managing the margin, because as Amos was saying, if you get down to a really low ticket item, we actually lose money on that. Not saying we won't do a fixed price deal, because we've done those as well, but it is complicated, and it does matter by city, by fleet, by your customer base. Thank you.
Okay, that's excellent. Now we're going to turn to the regulators. We're going to go, I guess, right to left. We'll start with Christiane, who's going to explain the problem she's facing now, and she's actively searching for a solution to this problem, political, economic, or otherwise. Christiane?
Thank you. As you've seen all over the national press, things are kind of a mess in San Francisco right now. We have drivers who take 2-hour lunch breaks and go honk and create gridlock around City Hall, and then everybody wonders what in the heck I'm doing. I don't know how much you want us to go into, like, the experience, or just...
Sure.
Yeah, okay, sure.
I mean, everybody needs to feel the pain. I mean... You need
It's
to know
very
the gory
painful.
details.
Now, I have to say, if the problem begins when you mandate credit card acceptance. Once you mandate credit card acceptance, you soon find out that somebody needs to pay for those costs. And that's when the drivers erupt. You only have a couple of choices. You have a choice of giving it to the driver, to the company, or to the consumer. In California, we are looking at our consumer protection laws and feeling that we are not legally able to pass it on to the consumer because of the consumer protection laws that don't allow retailers to charge a different rate based on your form of payment. So that was out. The second choice was to give it to the companies. And in fact, in San Francisco, we had a law that's been on the books for 15 years, back before credit cards had very much volume in taxis, that the companies were not allowed to pass the fees on to a driver. So that remained true until about a year ago, when the companies, because of the fact that we first got universal credit card capacity in the fleet when we installed the paratransit debit card system. So that meant that all 1,500 taxis for the first time had credit card capacity just about a year ago. That, in combination with the fact that so many more people are using non-cash forms of payment, meant that the volume of transactions went through the roof, and the companies went into a state of revolution, basically. What the reality on the ground with that law was that about half the drivers were working for companies that complied with the law and did not charge them any fees. The other half of the drivers worked for companies that were cheating on the law, and still are. And the drivers would have to go either to the Russian lady in the trailer or the guy with a gold chain at the airport who would cash it at 10%. And I think you probably all have a guy at the airport with a gold chain who cashes credit cards for 10%. So it's a little schizophrenic when we allowed the companies, and Yellow Cab, by the way, which is about a third of our fleet, was incurring about $1 million a year in credit card transaction costs, and that was basically just providing a cashiering service for the drivers. DeSoto Cab Company threatened to stop accepting credit cards altogether, and I had to threaten to sue them. They later went bankrupt, not because of that, but their credit card transaction fees, while they were obeying the rules, was about $15,000 a month and climbing. So they were not going to sit still any longer, and I was forced, even though I had other things on my agenda. I really wish I'd never heard about credit cards, frankly, but I have had to spend the last year to 18 months really digging into it and really trying to solve this problem. I want to make sure that as part of this discussion, I tell all of you who are about to go through this pain that the most important thing is to get both the public and that's what I learned at this conference this week, the public and your governing body to understand what's coming and to get behind you before you start this process. Because if you're out in front, you are going to get your head chopped off by somebody, I can guarantee it. The 11 words that ruined my life when spoken by a member of my board of directors were, if so many people are complaining, there must be something wrong. So you need your governing structure to get off of that thought before you go into this process, because city after city, it is like a comic book. There's a script. There's an introduction. There's part 1. There's part 2. There's the conclusion, and we're still in part 2 right now, I think. But the quotations from the newspapers across different cities are identical from the taxi drivers. The reactions from the drivers are identical, and so you really need to see that coming before you start this process and think it through carefully.
Have you had any proposed solutions at this point that you're able to share, or is that a work in progress?
Well, when I was trying to think, when I thought we were going to make a presentation, I was going to title my speech, What Not to Do. And what we have done is to react with some fear. In other words, we had 80 taxi drivers come to the board of directors meeting, at which point that famous quote was issued, and the board basically backed down, which made the drivers feel very, very empowered, and we had protest after protest after protest, and new driver groups springing up all over the place, and the taxi drivers wanting to get with the transit workers to have a strike to shut down the whole city, even though they really don't like each other. I couldn't figure that out. But so it's going to be a difficult process. I think we're all going to face it. Hopefully, those of us who are out in front will make it a little easier for you as you fall in behind. And currently, I guess I started to answer your question by saying the proposed solution that we have right now is that we're just studying the matter until the whole thing calms down.
Okay. Thank you, Christiane. Mark? I had staff walk into my office after we had TPIP out there and say, did you see Boston? Like a couple of weeks later they did, and they got nicer looking screens, newer ones than we did, and they were complaining to me about it. But things are very simple in Boston. They get done a lot more quickly than other places in general, in my opinion. That's, I think, in large part due to Mark and his practical approach. So I don't know what's going on there. Are you facing the same problems now with the drivers, or is that water under the bridge?
We face some of the same problems. So a brief history. Boston and the city of New York have a rivalry. I don't know if you're aware of this. It goes back a long way, and when I heard that Matt was charging 5%, in the city of Boston, we charge 6%. And that's in large part due to our rivalry. Now, as a point of fact, the 6% that we charge, the history of it is that we do not include fees and tolls and tips in the 6%. And so at the end of the day, when it all shakes out and everybody gets done, I think somebody spoke earlier about how there's so many hands in the till. And I think the discussion we just had, in this small segment of the business, there are an awful lot of hands in the till. But the difference between 5% and 6%, as a practical matter, I think it's probably very, very small. We in Boston, when we talk about change and reform in the taxi industry, very, very often, and I've been at this is my 26th year, very often the change and reform, for some reason, comes at the very time that we're discussing rate increases. I don't know why this is, but somehow the industry comes forward and they need a rate increase, and somehow at that very same moment, there's a great crossing, because Government, me being the face of government in that moment, we also have a long laundry list of things that we need to change. And the addition of credit card machines in the back of taxis in Boston is, in large part, corresponded to our last rate increase, just like Matt. There was a quid pro quo. The fact is that the amount of that rate increase was directly tied to the cost of both the equipment and transaction and the business of putting these units in the back of taxis. Now, that fact has long since been forgotten and probably never to be remembered by the average taxi cab driver in Boston. They believe that all money that comes across the meters is their money. And they forget very quickly, usually it's a week or two, that the customer, the riding public, has paid for this and has been paying for it and continues to pay for it every day, every ride, not just credit card rides, I might add. And in a city like Boston, where we've been doing this now we've had mandatory acceptance of these units for a little over 2 years. Every single, Paul doesn't need to ask anymore, do you take credit cards? Because if you ask, somebody's liable to say no. So don't ask. They all take credit cards. They are mandated by rule. They all have the equipment, and the equipment should be working. We found very rapidly that the amount, no surprises. The level of, at a time in the United States where it appears that many segments of the economy are not doing so well. Surprisingly enough, if you begin, and I can't really say that I have all the hard data, but I believe if you begin to look at that same period of time in the taxi industry, when these things were placed in the back of cabs, the business levels, paid miles, if that's a measurement, number of trips, total revenues, whatever you want to use, they're going up month by month by month. And it corresponds directly, surprisingly enough, to putting the credit card machines in the cabs. So there's more skin in the game. The rate increase has paid in large part for the effort. So the long answer is, are we having problems with our drivers? Yes, we are. We have a small but significant portion of drivers who refuse to use credit cards. And there are lots of ways that they do it. And it's a problem. It's an ongoing problem for me and my enforcement officers. We're working with the providers to sort of figure out who they are and a little bit more about this behavior. And we believe, I think our numbers are running 20, 25, 30, 33% credit card usage, total rides. We believe that the number is probably roughly like it will be in New York, around 50-50, that half the people will want to pay with cash and probably will continue, and about half will pay with credit cards. That's significant. All in all, I would sum it up by saying it is a very good experience. I do not get any complaints, not from day one, from one rider about having us have these credit card acceptance. Nobody complains about that. The riders, after all, are my primary concern in many ways. Acceptance is growing. We just need to have a further discussion, and I think Paul really hit on it. We need to educate our drivers and our industry about how it works. We need to tell them once, twice, 5 times, over and over, how it works. Because truthfully, even after 2 years,